Chapter 13, A Two-Front War. During World War II, the United States had to look in two directions at the same time. We were fighting a two-ocean war. That was a terrible problem for our generals and admirals. How do you divide your forces? How do you protect two huge coasts from attack? Looking west to East Asia, the view was frightening. In the Pacific Theater, the Japanese moved like lightning. Military officers call a war region a theater. Strange, but that's the way it is. Their forces were well trained and well equipped. At the start, Japan's aggressive strategy seemed to work. Remember, on December 7th, they didn't just bomb Pearl Harbor. They attacked a whole string of strategic spots almost simultaneously. In just a few months, the Japanese captured Thailand, the Philippine Islands, the Malay Peninsula, Java, Burma, Guam, Wake Island, the Gilbert Islands, Singapore, and Hong Kong. Check those places on a map and you'll see the Japanese controlled East Asia. People in India and Australia were trembling. They thought they were next. The European theater wasn't any better. As you know, the Nazis controlled most of Europe. They even had troops in North Africa. The Mediterranean was a kind of a Nazi sea. So was the Atlantic Ocean. That was because of the German U-boats. England and Russia were desperate for help. The United States had to ship weapons, tanks, oil, and men across the Atlantic to Europe. But the U-boats seemed to be everywhere. In the first 4 months of 1942, almost 200 of our ships were sunk. One summer day, people in Virginia Beach, Virginia, watched in horror as a ship was torpedoed and sunk in sight of the beach. Ships were being sunk faster than they could be built. Each time a ship was torpedoed, American men drowned. Somehow, people in this country didn't get discouraged. We were convinced we could win this war and set about doing it. FDR became a great war president. No matter how gloomy things seemed, President Roosevelt remained confident and optimistic. He gave courage to the nation. He had good people to work with. General George C. Marshall, his chief of staff, was a superb general and modest. Someone said he had the wisdom of George Washington and the strategic sense of Robert E. Lee. Tough and experienced, Admiral Ernest J. King, Chief of Naval Operations, did his job well. So did Admiral Chester W. Nimitz and Generals Dwight D. Eisenhower, H. Hap Arnold, Douglas MacArthur, and others. Remember all the trouble Abraham Lincoln had with his generals? Roosevelt was lucky. The nation was lucky too. But the first battles were grim. Admiral King warned, "The way to victory is long. The going will be hard." He was right. We started out as losers. Then things began to change. Maybe it was because the Japanese got greedy. They didn't know when to stop. They thought they were invincible, which means unbeatable. Nobody is unbeatable. We had been taking a pounding in the Pacific, but when we won 3 big victories, the Japanese learned to respect our fighting ability. The victories were in the Coral Sea, at Midway Island, and at Guadalcanal, all in 1942. The Coral Sea battle wasn't exactly a victory. There was a series of mistakes on both sides, big mistakes. Our losses were heavier than the enemy's, but we prevented them from capturing a strategic base in New Guinea, and that may have saved Australia from invasion. The Japanese expected an easy win at tiny Midway Island. If they controlled that island, they would control the air over Hawaii. Then perhaps they could attack our west coast. In addition, they intended to destroy the ships that our fleet had escaped Pearl Harbor, especially our aircraft carriers. Their plan was to lure us into a trap and surprise us. What they didn't know was that we could decode their secret messages. We knew of their plans. Still, they almost won. The battle over Midway was ferocious. At first, things were awful for us. 41 of our torpedo bombers took off after the Japanese ships, and most were shot down. Then our dive bombers arrived and destroyed 4 massive Japanese aircraft carriers. It was the first defeat the Japanese Navy had suffered. and it was a battle that proved that air power would be the key to this war. The battle for Guadalcanal was something else. If you hold on for a chapter, I'll tell you about it. But before that, you need to learn about something going on at home. Black and white blood. Charles R. Drew was uncommonly gifted. He was a star athlete in football, basketball, baseball, and track. A brilliant student at Amherst College, an outstanding doctor. He was a professor of medicine at Howard University, and the man who developed the idea of a blood bank for storing blood plasma during World War II. In 1942, he organized the blood bank programs for both the U.S. and Britain and supervised the Red Cross blood donor program. Besides all that, he had an amenable personality and people liked him. But he was enraged that black blood and white blood were segregated in blood banks, and he spoke out against that absurdity. He was killed in a car accident. A myth has grown that because of his color, he was refused treatment at an all-white hospital. That is not true. What is true is that his talents were often frustrated by the idiocy of prejudice.